Not everything in life is what it seems, because even salt looks like sugar.
My name is Kim, and I support Toni Ingram with Justice for Morgan.
My name is Shauna, and I support Toni Ingram in getting justice for her daughter Morgan, who was stalked and murdered.
I'm Grace, and I was raped 2 years ago, and I never got justice, and I support all the other victims, including Morgan Ingram, and justice for her and her family.
Hello, my name is Barbara, and I support Toni Ingram in getting justice for her daughter, Morgan.
My name is Feroz, and I support Toni.
Greetings from the dark side of the pomegranate. I am your host, Billy Housh. Welcome to Even Salt Looks Like Sugar, a podcast that explores true crime, paranormal activity, and unsolved mysteries. This series discusses difficult and distressing subject matter. Listener discretion is advised. Episode 10: The Death of Morgan Ingram. Imagine waking up to the news that your daughter is dead. Toni Ingram received this news almost a decade ago when her daughter, Morgan Ingram, was found lifeless on December the 2nd, 2011, in their Carbondale, Colorado home. Even though the case is closed, with so many questions left unanswered and a plethora of speculation, what happened to her? Join me today for our first season finale as I speak with Toni Ingram, Morgan's mother, about her daughter and the events that led up to her death and what she believes happened. This is the tragic death of Morgan Ingram. Hello, Toni. Thank you for being on the show. First and foremost, can you tell us about Morgan? What kind of person was she?
Oh, thank you for having me on. I greatly appreciate it. Morgan was our youngest daughter. She was 13 years younger than our oldest daughter and 10 years younger than our son. So she was the baby of the family and very, very much loved. She was a beautiful and kind person. She was known for her very caring heart and loving soul. She never let anything come before helping others, and she had many friends. Many times I'd tell her, I thought you were in your room studying for a big test. And she said, well, a friend called and needs me right now, so I'll be back. And she would take off. She enjoyed playing the piano and singing, always finding enjoyment, simple things like baking goodies for her family and friends. She crocheted and knitted little homemade presents for everyone, as well as getting up really early in the morning just to see the sunrise, because Morgan loved life so much. So this was really, really hard for us to lose her. Morgan surrounded herself with color. She loved philosophy, yoga, and meditation, along with every animal she ever met. Morgan actually taught herself how to play the piano, crochet, knit, sew, and she enjoyed horseback riding. She had a horse. She used to love to ride her bicycle back and forth into town instead of driving many times if it was a sunny day. And she was smiling constantly. She liked hiking, reading, and doing hula, which she learned in Hawaii when she went that last summer of her life. When she went as a graduation present from her godfather, she went to Hawaii and she learned how to hula. So she loved doing that too because she loved dancing. She loved teaching herself new things and making crafts. She taught herself languages, first French and then Lithuanian, because her father's family was from Lithuania. She was always finding time to do volunteer work and worked with children. She used to do help cancer survivors and people that were going through cancer treatment. She would go and help take care of their children while they were away at the hospital. And she never had time for video games and any teenage drama, so I guess she wasn't like your normal teenager. She preferred downtime, talking with me and hanging out on the couch many times. And she had us buy her the series Gilmore Girls and Buffy the Vampire Killer, and she'd want me to sit on the couch and watch them with her. And she would always tell me, "Mom, you're my best friend." And I would always say to her, "Morgan, don't be silly. I'm your mom." So most kids think of their moms as taskmasters or something like that. But Morgan would just squeeze my hand, like she always did from the day she learned to walk. And she would say, "You will always be my best friend because I can tell you anything and you listen to me." And that's emotional to me because now when I think back on it, I want to kick myself for not just saying, "I know you're my best friend too." But she was.
Wow, she sounds like an amazing person, and that also sounds like a beautiful relationship that you guys had with each other. That's now I'm going to ask you, when did she first tell you about a stalker or that she was being stalked? Could you explain that?
Yeah, August 2nd, 2011. We had just come back from vacationing with Morgan the night before. And that's when I guess she became aware of the stalker. We had no idea. She didn't tell us, and she didn't know it was a stalker. She just knew at the time when she came home and turned on her light in her bedroom and started getting undressed and ready for bed with her new puppy. She had just brought a new puppy home from vacation with us. She'd hear tapping on her window, and she had no idea what it was. And at first she just kind of thought, this is strange, because we'd been in that house for years and she had never had that happen. So later on, I found this out from her. I had no idea. She didn't tell us that night. But this went on for several days, and it bothered her so much. This was, I think the second was on a Tuesday, and I think by Friday night, she finally told us, something's really wrong and I'm getting really nervous. And she told us about the tapping on her window, because it wasn't just on her bedroom window, but it was also if she went into her bathroom to take a shower, now it was tapping on her bathroom window. And you couldn't see through the windows. But in her bathroom, you know how they have the obscured windows? So you could see a light come on and maybe shadows, but that's about it. And so she'd be in there and then there'd be tapping on that window. So she told me that night, Friday night, and I told her father. And we just said, well, it's dark now. We didn't think anything of it. We knew nothing about stalking and what could happen. And so we just said, in the morning when it's light, we'll go out and see. Maybe there's a bird tapping on your window or a branch hitting the window from the wind or something like that. So we just went to bed that night. The next morning we got up when it was light. We all walked out there and searched, and we looked, and there was nothing that could have been hitting her window. So then we got nervous.
Okay. Now, Toni, this next part is going to be difficult. Taking you back to the day you discovered Morgan, what did you notice and what happened?
Well, we went into her room. Well, first of all, I guess I should tell you that it was like the perfect storm. It was hard because 4 days before she was murdered, 4 days before she was scheduled to give her on-camera statement was the morning that I found her. So, but we didn't know at the time, but the sheriff had told the suspects just days before her murder that she was going to be giving her on-camera statement because they believed that they were going to be making an arrest. So I knew there was an impending arrest coming up, but they didn't tell me that they went to the suspects and told them or warned them. I don't know what they were thinking. Maybe the detective thought that they were just going to confess or get nervous, but it was a good way to get rid of the witness at that point. We had no idea. And then 2 days before her murder, when the sheriff came to our house to check the camera again, their cameras, we had cameras, they had cameras, to check their camera again, I was still hopeful that it was going away, that it was going to snow any day and the stalker would go away because there would be tracks in the snow and he wouldn't be able to stalk her anymore. I told that to the detective, and the detective said, no, I believe that the stalking is going to escalate. That was 2 nights before the murder. So then the night of the murder, we hadn't been sleeping. None of us had been sleeping. We were totally exhausted, and we did everything wrong, possibly wrong. We were so tired, and my husband said, our large dog, our Newfoundland, who's not really a watchdog, but she's a big dog, we always left her loose in the house to guard, the house from the stalker. The sheriff had said they were putting extra additional patrols on our house that night or that week after Tuesday, and Thursday night was the night she was killed. So they were putting additional things. And when they did, our larger dog would bark because they would set off the alarm. And my husband was so exhausted. We had the motion detector alarm. So every time they'd come by in their large trucks, it would set off the alarm. So my husband disconnected the alarms, and because he wanted to sleep, and he felt like we were safe because they had additional patrols on the house, which was a really bad mistake. And then, so that was the first mistake. The second mistake was the dog was acting really strange that night. When Morgan went into her room and closed her door, our large dog was lying on the entry floor, just staring at her door, and she never did that. And so I was going to leave her loose, and my husband said, no, she's going to bark when the alarm goes off, she's going to bark again. We need to get our sleep. So put her in our room. So he dragged her into our room and closed the door. So she didn't have free run of the house, which was another mistake, huge mistake. There were just so many mistakes. It was unbelievable that we made that night. We had our motion detector in the backyard on the deck, so that it was guarding the two big sliding glass doors in the backyard. We had taken that in the house the night before. He wanted to paint it a camouflage color because we had to keep moving it around because it kept ending up on the ground upside down where it wouldn't go off. So the person knew where we were putting it, and they could put it on the ground when we weren't home upside down. So he was going to camouflage it with paint and hide it somewhere, and it hadn't dried yet, and so we hadn't put it back out there. So that alarm wasn't on. There were just so many little things that we did wrong. It was unbelievable. And then after the dog was locked up in our room, which was in the back of the house, and Morgan's room was on the very front of the house, so it was a 3,500 square foot house, so we were very far apart, and the doors were solid wood doors. The other thing that happened was she was in that room, and we didn't hear anything, and I thought everything was fine. And my husband said, let's take sleeping pills because we really need to get some rest. We're not being coherent these days. We're so exhausted. So we both took sleeping pills, and that was a huge mistake to take a sleeping pill. So we fell asleep, and the next morning he woke up, I think it's probably around 5 a.m., not sure, and went in, started the coffee, sat at the table, was reading the news. And then I got up after that. I'm not sure exactly what time it was, 6 a.m. or something. And I walked in the kitchen, and I said, did Morgan get up and take the puppy out to go potty? Because after the stalker showed up in the backyard at 5 a.m. when she went to let the puppy go potty out in the backyard, and scared the living hell out of her, we told her, don't ever go out in the backyard unless your dad and I are awake. Otherwise, if she has to go potty, wake us up and we'll just take her out for you. So he said, no, I haven't seen her. And I thought that was kind of strange because the puppy would want to go potty by then. So I walked in her room, up to her door, and knocked on the door, and she didn't answer me. So I opened the door, and the first thing I saw was bizarre. Morgan never left her light on in her bedroom or her bathroom or her closet, because every time she turned on the light in the beginning of the stalking, which was 4 months before that, that's when it started, she would get the knocking within minutes on her window or something, and it would scare her, so she would just keep the lights off. So I walked in her room, and she looked her room was dark, and it looked like she was sleeping in her bed on the wrong side of the bed where she normally didn't sleep on, and facing the wrong direction, but under the cover. So I thought, okay, she's sleeping. And then I looked, her bathroom light was on, and her puppy and her cat, who never hung out together because they didn't like each other, were sitting next to each other with these bewildered looks on their faces. But it still didn't occur to me anything was wrong. I just thought it was strange. So I called the puppy, and she came to me, and I brought her out in the backyard, and she went potty, and I brought her back in. And when I brought her back in Morgan's room, I looked, and I saw that she had a little accident. She pooped on the floor by the door, and it was all dry. It was like old, and it wasn't there the night before. So I said to Morgan, Morgan, are you going to say thank you? I'm cleaning up your dog's poopy. And she didn't answer me. And I picked up the poop, and I got rid of it, and I came back in. I said, Morgan, and then now I was getting scared. And I walked up to her bed, and I shook her shoulder because her blanket was pulled all the way up to her shoulder. And I shook on her shoulder, and she felt warm, but she didn't react. And then all of a sudden, this energy just rushed through me. I said, something is really, really wrong. So I just started screaming, and I ran out of her room, and I was screaming for Steve and her father, and he came running down the hall, and we both came running back into her room, and he was screaming, Morgan, what's wrong? What's wrong? And so she was on the left side of her bed. She had a queen-size bed. So he kneeled on the right side of her bed and threw the comforter off of her. And that was the first time, Billy, that we saw something was really weird, because she was laying on her right side. Her head was on the pillow, but her arms were bent at a 90-degree angle, and her left arm was rose above her body. So it was above her body, like it had been holding the blanket up, and her knees were at a 90-degree angle. So, but they were apart. They weren't together. When you lay on your side, it's very easy for somebody to understand. If they lay on your right side and pretend you're going to sleep, your arm does not stay at a 90-degree angle up in the air like that, neither does your knee. It's impossible because it lays down, it hits the bed. And so her body didn't look normal at all, and he just rolled her onto her back right away, and her knees were bent, her legs were up in the air, and her knees were bent, and her arms were up in the air, her fists were facing the ceiling. The second thing I noticed about her was her hands were in fists. And so that's what I thought. I said, oh my gosh, her hands are in fists. Is she clenching something? But they were tight, like in fists. And that's the only thing I thought. And then I looked at her, and Steve started CPR on her right away and screamed at me to go call 911. So I ran across the hallway into my office, because that was my office area. And I grabbed the phone and I called 911. And I told them what was happening. And the woman said, is when he pushes on her chest, is there movement or is it hard? And so I said, let me find out. So I put the phone down, ran in the room. I said, are you getting movement in her chest? And he said, yes, it's moving. And I said, okay, great. So I ran back in the room again, and I said, it's moving. She said, great, get her on a hard surface. Don't leave her on the bed on her back. Put her on a hard surface. So I put the phone down again. I ran into the room, and you're just reacting to whatever they're telling you at that point. So I run in the room. They said to put her on the floor. So he is on the bed now on his knees trying to give her CPR, and he grabs her shoulders, and I grabbed her ankles, and we swung her onto the floor of the bedroom, onto the carpet. And right when we swung her onto the carpet, I was holding her ankles and Steve was holding her shoulders. It was the strangest thing. We didn't know it at the time. Later on, we talked, and we both knew that we saw the same thing. But right when we touched her to swing her onto the floor, and I was looking at her face the whole time, and he was looking at her face, it's like she turned like Smurf blue, like with the blue that the Smurfs are on television. She looked like she turned Smurf blue, but she wasn't Smurf blue before that. She wasn't blue when we got her on the floor. It's just in between, she looked blue. And it was shocking to me. And I let go of her ankles when she hit the ground, and I ran back in to talk on the phone to 911 again. And Steve continued CPR at that point. And then she was reassuring me that the ambulance was on the way, the first responders, and that they would be there any time. So then I said, okay. And I stayed on the phone with her for a little bit. And then she said, okay, they're coming around the corner. So I ran in the room and told Steve, they're coming around the corner. He goes, okay, go outside and move the car out of the driveway so they could pull up right away. So I ran out to the driveway to get into the car that Morgan, she was sharing my car at the time, because her car had 300,000 miles on it, and it was breaking down. And I was too scared for her to drive that car anymore. So she was driving my car, so she had pulled it up into the driveway that night. So I ran out there with my keys, and it was almost like I went into an altered state, because I just didn't want to believe what was happening. I think what was going on. So I walked out to the car, and I didn't know this until later when I reviewed the camera. I could see what I was doing. I ran out to the car, I opened the door. I could see her acceptance letter to the college on the dashboard that was accepting all her credits. She knew she was accepted, but she wanted to make sure all her credits were accepted. So it was the acceptance letter for her credits she had just gone to the post office that day, was on the thing. And then I saw her bag with her ballet stuff in it. And I was always telling her, don't leave your ballet shoes in the car overnight because it's freezing and, it could damage the shoes. And I saw she had her ballet shoes in there and a bag of stuff and some things. And so I just grabbed it, and her sweater. She had a sweater. And so an old sweater that she had left in the car. So it's like I was cleaning up the car. I forgot what I was doing. So I picked up the stuff. I was walking through the front door. As soon as I walked in the front door, Steve screamed at me, did you move the car? I said, oh my God, I just dropped everything. I go run back out the front door again, jumped in the car, and I drove out the driveway, and I parked it in front of the house. And I realized that I could see the first responders, they were down the street at the wrong house. So I started screaming and yelling and waving my arms, and so then they jumped in their truck and they came rolling up, and they came up the driveway, and I ran through the front door back into the house again. They came in and they said, okay, we need you to leave the room. Can you go in the other room? We can't have you in here right now. And they unpacked all their stuff, and they opened her shirt up, and they tried to, zap her and stuff. And so then Steve and I went into the living room, and they came in and they were asking us questions about what position we found her in, what happened, and blah, 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 blah. And we were talking to them for a little bit. And then the sheriff came and said that they were going to close it off as a crime scene, and that we had to get dressed and leave the house. So I went in the room to get dressed, and still in shock. And then Steve laid down on the couch to show the sheriff now the position that we found her body in. He laid on the couch on his right side, showing him exactly how she died. Later on, 2 years later, when we get the sheriff's report finally, he writes down that when he got there, her father was laying on the couch upset, and didn't even explain that he was sitting on the couch until he asked what position she was in, and then he laid on the couch to show him, and he made it sound like he was just laying on the couch in the living room. So it was just, that was the beginning of all these crazy things that happened. And then we went next door, and then they proceeded from there.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what would go through your mind and how you would feel during that time. I'm sure everything would be a complete haze during that. And you were mentioning, go ahead. Yes.
Oh, I was going to say, and you don't want to believe what you're seeing, too. Another thing that we saw, we were looking at her face, right, that her nose was flattened, and her lips were swollen. There was blood on her teeth. There was blood on her forehead, like a wound, like a little round circle, just below her hairline on her temple. Her hair was a big mess. And the day before, she had just showered, was blow drying her hair, and she had the curling iron. She was curling her hair, and she was putting on makeup because she was going into town to help her friend find a job. So her hair, and when she came home that night, her hair was gorgeous. It was still down. It was, wavy and beautiful. And when we saw her, her hair was like all matted, like there was a struggle. And the night before also, when I went in her room at 8 o'clock, before she came home at 5 minutes after 9. But at 8 o'clock when I went in her room, because Steve and I had been gone for about 2 hours, we went to the grocery store and out to dinner and stuff. And that was the other mistake we made too. We usually left the puppy and our dog loose in the house whenever we were gone to guard the house. But that night, Morgan had left the puppy at home that afternoon when she went into town to help her friend find a job. And the puppy had ripped up one of our larger dog's stuffed animals, and it was all over the living room. So after I cleaned it all up, when we went out, I put them in the laundry room and locked them up. So the house was not guarded when we were gone for those 2 hours. And so that was another thing we did wrong.
Well,
her hair was all matted. It was all a big mess, and that wasn't normal as well. And her pants were unbuttoned and unzipped, which was why? What was that all about? And just everything looked weird on her. And we were in a shock, and we were in I guess, a haze. So we didn't notice all the other things that were wrong with that crime scene at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned the authorities were questioning a suspect for the stalking prior. What did they tell you about that?
They were the first ones that came up with what they believed was the main suspect. There was more than one suspect. This wasn't just one person stalking Morgan. This was actually him and his, at the time, girlfriend that were stalking Morgan. I don't know whether it started out as a joke and he became obsessed or what ended up happening, but they interviewed both of them. And they had both of them in the police report, but the girl was just under 18, so they had to redact her name. He was the main suspect, and they believed it was all him, mostly. And even 5 months after her murder, they interviewed him. And I think on one of the shows that they did on Morgan, they actually had parts of that interview. And I mean, basically the detective was telling him, you know, this doesn't pass a smell test. You're lying to us. We can see you in the video coming up her driveway. And he just said, it wasn't me. But I mean, they knew it was him. And we knew it was his car. because of the girl on the car and, everything. It didn't have a license on it at the time, but it fit the description of his car exactly. They knew it was him. I mean, they did know it was him. Morgan knew it was him. They talked about what they were going to do. They asked her not to get an order of protection because they believed that they could catch him in the act, and that might scare him off, which would have been a nice thing, although I don't think it would have scared him off. But it would have given us a lot more leverage if she had gotten an order of protection. It was horrible. It was just horrible.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were talking about a show, and you appeared on the show Accident, Suicide, and Murder. The show made you take a polygraph test, and I know how polygraph tests don't exactly, they don't work in court exactly. And it on the show, you failed some of the questions. I'd like to give you a chance to explain what do you think, what happened in that situation?
Well, I know exactly what happened. In fact, one of the stars of the show, Kelly, came on and told me before the show came out, so I knew what was going on. They rewrote the show in exactly what they wanted. The person that was running the show wanted it to look like nothing really happened, which wasn't true. Both people, Kelly as well as Paul Holes, all the way through, said they knew she was murdered. They believed who the murderer was. They thought they were going to be able to catch him. They even did a DNA thing, but they didn't match it up. They didn't try to match it to anybody, but they did have the DNA on something that was left in her room that night. Kelly was beside herself. She was very upset over the whole thing. And I told her, well, there's not a lot you can do. When you go out there and you decide to do something on television, you're kind of at the whim of what they end up doing. If they've been threatened or anything happens, they can change it in a heartbeat. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so they didn't show everything complete. As far as the polygraph test went, I was there for 8 hours. The person that was running the polygraph test, I believe, was really good. I thought he was good. He had good credentials, and he ran into major problems with both Steve and I. First, before we took the test, I explained to them I needed them to find out if there would be a problem with Steve taking it, because he had a traumatic brain injury when he was years ago. And we were told by another expert that he can't do a polygraph test because it could be flawed because of the traumatic head injury he went through. And he doesn't always get dates right. He gets a lot of things confused off and on. So I told them that up front, and I said, could you check with the polygraph person and see if that's going to be okay? They told me they did, and he said it was fine. Later on, I find out that's not true, but that's what they said at the time. So I thought, okay, no problem, because he wanted to do it, and I wanted to do it. I thought it would be a good thing. And then, so that was one thing that happened. Another thing that happened is I'm only 5'2", so I guess I'm kind of short. I didn't understand at the time that he told me, okay, you have to sit very still and you have to keep your feet on the ground, right, at all times. My feet couldn't be on the ground at all times because the chair was too high. So I kept saying, he'd ask me, are your feet on the ground? And I'd say, yes, and I'd put them on the ground. But then I'd move them up because I couldn't sit like that for that long, and I was there for 8 hours. And we did have breaks in between, but it was hard. And so I kept moving my feet. Later on, I found a person that I became friends with who's an active FBI agent that did this. She did polygraph. And I was explaining to her all the things that happened. She couldn't believe it. She goes, I can't believe they even did that polygraph. He kept stopping throughout the 8 hours to call up. He said he was calling Paul Holes. I don't know whether it was Paul Holes or it was the other woman I'm talking about, but saying he was having all kinds of problems. And they kept telling him to continue. So he'd go back in and he'd say, okay, let's do this again. Let's do this again. And then he would stop it. With me, anyway, I could just tell you me because I was separated from Steve at the time. With me, he'd stop it and he'd go, okay, you need to say, when I ask you the question, do you feel guilty about Morgan's death? And I would say, yes. He'd stop the test and he'd say, why do you feel guilty? And I tell him I feel guilty because I did everything wrong. I thought I was doing everything right. I did everything wrong. I have to feel guilty because my daughter's dead. If I had done everything right, my daughter would be alive. And he'd tell me, I have a son too, and that's not true. You can't blame yourself for her death. And I said, for her murder. And I said, you know what, I can. And there's nothing you can say that's going to change that. And he'd go, okay, look at it this way. And he kept telling me different things. And he'd say, okay, you have to answer the question, no. And so he'd ask me a question and I'd say, no, but it wasn't true. I did believe that I was guilty, of her murder because I didn't stop it. I'm a mom. I told it to him. I started crying. He started crying. I said, look, you have to understand. We were trying everything. If I had gotten her out of there, like her sister called every night for 5 nights before her murder, begging me to send her to California to get her out of there because she had a bad feeling. Her godfather from Hawaii called up for weeks asking me to get her out of there and to send her to his place in Hawaii. And same with her soulmate who was in Savannah at the time. He was asking her. Every time I'd say, please, Morgan, I think you got to get out of here. She'd say, I have 2 more weeks of school. I have a puppy I don't want to leave behind. And I have babysitting things I'm supposed to be doing, for over Christmas because the tourists are coming in. So she had babysitting things that she had committed to. And I said, it doesn't matter. This is dangerous. You got to get out of here. She said, no. She was 20 years old and there was no way I could make her. Now, in retrospect, like I told the polygraph person, I would have tied her up and threw her in the back of the car and dragged her out of there if I thought that there was a possibility of her being murdered. And I didn't. So no matter what anybody says, I'm going to believe that I'm guilty. And then the other thing that he said that I failed on, or they said I failed on, he didn't say that to me, was he asked me if I had moved anything in her room. I said, yes, we moved her body from the bed onto the floor. We completely changed. And when I did that, when I pulled on her legs, I forgot to tell you this, her legs went straight. So they were no longer bent. Her arms were still facing the ceiling, but her legs went straight. So I explained all this to him. And he said, that's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you if you changed anything in the room that would have a whatever. I don't know how exactly he said it, but he basically wanted to know if I made it look like something it wasn't. And I kept telling him, yes, I moved her body. And he kept saying, that's not what I'm asking you. So we went through that's why it took 8 hours. And we went through it so many times. So then I'd finally just say what he wanted me to say. I'd say, no, I did not move anything. But I'm sure my body was telling me, yes, you did. You moved your body. So he wouldn't accept my answers when I explained to him why I was answering a certain way, because he wanted it to sound a certain way. And so I disregarded it. When Kelly called me and told me what happened, I said, well, Kelly, this is why, and I know why. And she didn't even know that the polygraph testing guy had called supposedly while we were there, Paul Holes, like at least 6 times to tell him it wasn't working. She didn't even know about it. They weren't even communicating.
Mm-hmm. That your explanation makes perfect sense, especially with how you described earlier what had happened. And throughout the description, it felt like you were internalizing it. You were blaming yourself and saying that these were different mistakes you guys did. I think the polygraph test, the person testing you didn't understand in the context of why you were saying these things. And usually, from what I understand, polygraph tests only look at the transcript, and that's what they use in court. So maybe that's why he was so stuck on the wording of what you were saying, but not taking into account the context of why you were saying these things. So it does, that is very, very strange. Was there a reason why didn't they do a polygraph test on the suspect, the person that was stalking your daughter?
They never did. They didn't do anything. His father was threatening to sue. They just didn't. They did nothing. Basically, let's see, she was murdered on December 2nd. I believe May, I can't remember the exact date in May, but in May, afterwards, months later, after he had already brought the suspect in to the sheriff station, substation, and interviewed him on camera, and he didn't admit to doing it, to stalking Morgan or murdering her. They decided there was nothing they could do because he didn't admit it. They never do anything unless somebody admits it, I guess. And we went in to meet with him to give him even more evidence that we found at that point in time. And he looked at us on camera, because we were on camera at the time, and he said, we have no evidence of a stalker. We don't even know who the stalker was. I could have been the stalker for all that matters. pointing to himself. He said this chair could have been the stalker, and he lifted up a chair and held it out to me. And my husband looked at him and just said, and then looked at me and said, "Toni, we're gone. There's no, I mean, now they're trying to say there's no stalker." When the sheriff knew, I mean, the detective knew all along. He was the one telling us. He did a poster with the guy's picture, the car, our house, everything on the poster. He passed it out not only to the sheriff's department, but also to the Carbondale Police Department, everyone else that could possibly be around our area to look out for this guy. I mean, he knew it was the guy, and so he was told by somebody. And so then my husband grabbed my shoulder and said, "We're out of here." So I said, "Okay, fine." So I turned around. We walked out of the room that they were recording us in. And as soon as we were trying to leave, the sheriff deputy, since he was off camera, leaned out of the door to where we were. And he looked at us and he said, "It doesn't matter what Megan," that was the other detective on the case, "and I believe in here." And he pounded on his heart. He said, "We have to do what we're told."
Wow, that's crazy. Now, you did
and at that point, we knew what we were up against.
Yeah. You did mention about DNA. Was it ever proven the DNA on those items found were of the suspect? And did he ever give up his DNA?
They told me when they did the DNA, when they had the DNA done, they told me exactly what DNA was on there and that they had it. It was a male DNA. I also told them, well, there's a lot more to it too, about the kind of the hat that it was on and what kind of hat it was and where it had come from. But I won't get into that right now. But they said that they were going to try to get the DNA from the person to see if it matched. But then they were told not to. They were told to stand down and that they couldn't do it. So they never got the DNA from the person that they believed, that Paul Holes believed it belonged to. I mean, he told us this. He told my son this. And he told Kelly this. I mean, they knew. They did know. So we still have the DNA, but we don't have the stalker's DNA yet.
Now, there's a lot of speculation about this amitriptyline. I hope I'm saying it right. Amitriptyline.
Right.
Now,
amitriptyline.
Did Morgan take amitriptyline, or can you tell me more about this?
She was exposed to carbon monoxide when she was younger, and we didn't, but it was low levels. We had no idea, and she got really sick over a period of a year, to the point where her hair started falling out. She was too weak to go to school. We didn't know what it was, and the doctors in the area, we were bringing her to doctors, they had no clue either. So we brought her to Children's Hospital in Denver. They didn't know what it was. They tested her for everything, but not for carbon monoxide, unfortunately. And they said she had chronic pain, and they're the first ones that gave her amitriptyline. They prescribed it, and she was young, so she was taking it for a while. And then we found out that it was because we had a carbon monoxide leak in the place that we were living. And so we immediately moved her out, and we brought her to the hospital, had her tested, and it was off the charts on how much carbon monoxide she had in her body. It was so bad. It was unbelievable. They had never seen anything like it. And so, but luckily carbon monoxide starts coming out of your body right away. So she started feeling better not being in the house, and she started feeling better all the time, better and better. And she started going to school again, and she was so happy she had her life back, and she knew what caused it. But then we didn't realize that there were going to be long-term effects from that, and what it was she continued to have chronic pain because her parasympathetic and her sympathetic nervous systems had flip-flopped, which happens after a trauma, or it happens after carbon monoxide or whatever, or after an operation sometimes, even in some people. And we didn't know this until we brought her to UCLA to see why she was having pain still. And Dr. Zeltzer was the one that, figured it out. And then she was having IBS because of it too. So she kept her on amitriptyline for a little while. And then finally, when Morgan was older, she turned 18, she decided, I'm not taking pills anymore. I'm going all natural. So she started doing yoga. She started doing all kinds of stuff, and she went off medication completely. And she felt great. And she started getting stronger and stronger. She was able to travel again and do things with her friends. And she just was such a happy girl at that point. So she didn't have any amitriptyline anymore. She wasn't taking it. The only thing she did take is every once in a while, if for some reason she had something that upset her a lot, like something scary or something happened, like she would have a pain attack. And so we'd bring her to the ER. and they would give her some, some medication and put a drip into her, and then she'd sleep it off for 24 hours, and then she'd be fine again. But she didn't want to go to ER, so we talked to Dr. Zeltzer again. She said, you know what, I'm going to give her gabapentin, and if she starts feeling an attack come on, take one. It's an off-record use for the gabapentin. Take one gabapentin. If that doesn't work, take two. And if it's really bad, take three. And she might not have to go to ER. And she only had one attack after that was prescribed to her, and she took it, and it worked. And we didn't have to go to ER, thank God. So she was happy. So we always put three of them in a little stainless steel little carrier thing for pills, and she kept it in the car, so she kept it with her all the time, and she still had the three in there when she died. And we had a big, huge bottle of gabapentin. So I mean, that would have worked a lot better than amitriptyline to kill her, but she didn't have that in her bedroom. So the person that killed her did not know that she had gabapentin. She only had an old, expired, year-and-a-half expired prescription for amitriptyline that had almost all the pills in it when she died. So they took that into custody, and when they found out she had amitriptyline in her body, they said, oh, she's just taking it. This is her medication. And I told the pathologist, no, she hasn't taken it in over a year and a half, and she hates it. And she would never take it. And he said, well, parents are the last to know. But when we had we had the second opinion done by a very esteemed medical examiner out of Colorado too.
Yes.
And he looked at her levels, and he looked at her toxicology results, and he actually called the head of the lab that did the toxicology results in Maryland and talked to him. And he called us up and he said, you know what, all you need is this toxicology results to know that she, number one, did not die from natural causes. She died from a massive dose of amitriptyline. Number two, it's a sexual assault drug. Number three, you could tell by the amount that was in her blood, which you have to take it's kind of hard to understand, and I didn't understand it at the time until I was told by a doctor and by scientists, that you have to take the amount, which was 7,900, I believe, in her bloodstream of the amitriptyline, and also add in the nortriptyline, which is the metabolite. So the length of the time that the amitriptyline is in your body, it starts spilling over into nortriptyline. So it turns into nortriptyline. So if you add those two together, it's basically 10,000 grams of amitriptyline that was put into her body. And then when we talked to an amazing toxicologist from back east on all the major, high-profile cases, and he looked it over, he said she would have died anywhere between 500 and 1,000 milligrams in her stomach spilling into her blood. She would have died. But she didn't. She had almost 10,000 milligrams or nanograms in her bloodstream. And the amount, if you take the amitriptyline versus the nortriptyline and you see the percentage difference, it will tell you whether or not she was taking it. And because it was so low on the nortriptyline compared to the amitriptyline, it was only in her body for a short amount of time, the massive level, and then she died. Then she died from it. So you could tell so that's why the second opinion that we got and the toxicologist that ran the numbers explained why right away they would have known that the pathologist was wrong, that she wasn't taking the amitriptyline. It was a one-time massive dose that she could not have ingested, because by the time it went into her blood, she would have been dead by 500 to 1,000 nanograms.
Toni, why do you believe there's so much resistance of your family seeking justice for Morgan? Hearing about the police kind of flipping their story, and I heard stories about just people coming after you about seeking the truth. Why do you think that's the case?
Why do I think that's the case? It's kind of not just us. I've been told by federal agents, I've been told by lots of people before I started working with other families of victims that are in the same situation we're in, and there's a lot of them out there. This is what happens. Sometimes, I guess, there's many different reasons for it. There's many, many different reasons why they come after you, the trolls. But Equitas is a nonprofit organization focused on developing, evaluating, and refining prosecution practices related to all kinds of gender-based violence, human trafficking, all different things. And they state typically the perpetrator harasses and attacks the victims and the victim's family. Often the offender's families and friends attack. They say don't snitch to others. That happens, or they'll try to get rid of or discredit the victim or the victim's family or the co-victims. The problem is when members of the criminal justice system do not respond appropriately to that intimidation and fail to correct the system deficiencies that enables opportunities to intimidate, they become inadvertent accomplices to the intimidators. So unfortunately, the Justice Department as well as the law enforcement becomes their accomplices. They allow this kind of thing to happen to people. So the victim and the victims or witnesses, immediate family, including spouses, children, and pets, become targets. And that's what happened to us. And I mean, I know that even people from different countries that don't even know us or don't even know what really happened at all, they'll come on, and the federal agents told me that the reason this happens, like there was that big, the shooting that happened in Denver just before Morgan was killed, or actually it was right after Morgan was killed, and they were shot in the theater, all these innocent people. The guy came in and shot all these people and children in the theater at night when the movie came out, and then he sat on the curb and waited for the police to arrest him, so they arrested him because he had mental problems, obviously. But they actually had, the victims' families had their phone numbers in the trial transcript, right? These victims were getting phone calls from people from out of the country telling them that it was their fault that their child was killed by that person. It's all their fault. The person wasn't guilty. So, I mean, it happens to everybody. It's not just us. It's not, I'd love to say it's just us that are getting attacked, but it's not. It's just something that does happen. And it's sad that it happens, but it happens over and over again. So these people sit behind their computer screens and they're trolls, and they just want to attack and they want to lie. And a lot of the people in the beginning of this whole thing that got it all revved up, I believe I've traced them back to friends of the family. So that's kind of like how it starts, and then other people join on the bandwagon. I just don't let them distract me.
I see. That actually is eye-opening too. So people can learn more about this from the Equitas. I believe that's the name of the organization.
Right. If they go on if they go on Equitas's website, and let me see, how do you spell it? Let me look it real quick and see in my notes. It's AEQUITAS. And they're good to read about. And also, I don't know whether Sarah told you this or not, but I actually wrote something in a book that just came out too called Survivors. I don't know whether you heard about that book.
No, please tell us about it.
Okay, let me just, I'm going to try. Dennis Griffith is the one that wrote the book. And it meant a lot to me to kind of contribute a chapter in the book with Morgan's story. So there's 23 people who had the opportunity to share their story in the book Survivors. And Dennis N. Griffin, Griffin, is a retired investigator. Survivors combines investigative journalism and real cases to highlight the growing number of unsolved cases and issues with police transparency and cases where corruption interrupts due diligence. And that's what we've been working on, our due diligence all these years. According to NPR.org, the national clearance rate for homicide today is 64.1%. 50 years ago, this is an eye-opener, it was more than 90%. Survivors bring systematic issues to the forefront along with strategies of how law enforcement and the judicial system can work together to reduce this statistic and give families hope for resolution. So even as shocking as those clearance rates are for homicides, Morgan's death, like so many other victims that I work with now, because I'm also the West Coast director for FOVAMP, which is Families of Homicide Victims and Missing Persons. But Morgan's death, like so many other victims, is not even figured into that calculation that we're talking about. There's so many more deaths that are actually murders that are wrongly called natural, accidental, or suicide, depending on what they decide to say. the pathologist that did Morgan's murder, I've had so many families now contact me over the last few years, actually, telling me that he was their pathologist too. And like one of the most recent ones, the father said that his son went missing. They found him. They pulled him out of a lake, I believe, far away from where he was last seen. And the same pathologist said he died of accidental drowning. Well, the guy's body was beaten to a pulp. So how do you get beaten up and fall in a lake that's far, far away from where you were last seen? I don't know. But, I mean, it's horrible. So there's a lot of wrongful manner of deaths, let's say, that are called. And it's not just this pathologist. It happens many times all over the United States and probably the world. So anyway, it's been said that awareness is most certainly the greatest agent for change, and that's exactly what I'm trying to accomplish, is change. We need to even the playing field for victims as well as co-victims, for all those families and friends that are left behind after a horrific murder. Right now, that field favors the perpetrator, not the victim, as sad and unbelievable as that sounds.
Mm-hmm. It's a great thing that these organizations do exist, and I believe that there needs to be more awareness to this issue. Well, thank you very much, Toni. I believe that you have every right to question what happened to your daughter, because based on what you have shared today, it's definitely, she was a victim of foul play. Now, are there any websites or a social media presence or anything that you can share that people want to follow up and learn more? Can check
actually,
out?
I only have a few. There's a lot out there that act like they're me, but they're not me, and there's nothing I can do about them really, so I just don't put the effort into trying to get rid of them, I guess. But the original, 6 months after Morgan's murder, I started a website and blog. It has over 7 million readers in 115 countries around the world, because stalking is not just a horrific crime in America. It happens everywhere, as I now know. So many people have written into me. So many have written into me over the years to tell their story and ask for advice. And so I've become a stalking victim advocate. And so we put together this website, and it's morganingram.com. And on that website, you can also get to the blog that I started. My husband helped me put together the website 6 months after her murder. And that's basically when all the trolls started attacking. First, it was his family and friends. I've saved everything that they've written into me, and it's just, they contradict themselves over and over again. It's like a joke almost, it's ridiculous. He wasn't even in the state when Morgan was stalked or murdered, and he was 5 minutes away working at the store. So he was right there. And then also the blog is morganstalking.com, so you can get to that. And then also I have a public Facebook and Twitter page, and both of them are called Morgans with an S. Stalking.
Okay, so those are the official things that people should go just to those.
Right. Those are the only two so far that I've ever had up. I mean, I might do more in the future, but those are it right now.
Okay. Once again, thank you so much, Toni. Thank you for your time.
Oh, I greatly appreciate you having me on. I really appreciate it.
Toni Ingram.
Oh, not again.
Toni Ingram. All right, come on.
Can't breathe.
Toni Ingram. Okay, come on.
Joining me today is our writer and co-producer, Sarah Afshar.
Hello, Billy. How are you? As you are already aware, I've had the opportunity to speak with Mrs. Ingram in the past about Morgan, her beautiful daughter who tragically lost her life in early December of 2011. Originally, I had the preconceived notion that Morgan Ingram was stalked for months by the man she personally identified. It wasn't until I started diving deep into this case, Billy, before I realized she was a stalking victim, because she personally identified the stalker herself. Despite the propaganda being spread by third parties about this case and their sad attempts at pushing confounding theories and narratives, the more I started to believe Toni Ingram was actually telling the truth. simply because they attempted to perpetuate a stalking never happened, when Morgan personally identified the man stalking her. And theoretically speaking, overlooking such facts to push a false narrative isn't very wise. For instance, Morgan Ingram had an obscene level of amitriptyline in her blood. She had 7,909 nanograms in her bloodstream alone. Anywhere from 500 nanograms to 1,000 is considered lethal. So how can a 20-year-old who weighs 115 pounds have over 6,000 nanograms, the lethal dose, in her blood? And keep in mind, there were no syringes found in her bedroom. In addition to this, Morgan had 2,833 nanograms of nortriptyline in her blood. The numbers are relatively close and are both way over the lethal limit. Now, if you examine the amount in her stomach, Morgan had 2,287,440 nanograms of amitriptyline with a nortriptyline level of only 9,431 nanograms. Now, do you notice the ratio, Billy, in the blood and in the gastric fluids? I would like to know why the ratio is so close in the blood versus the stomach or gastric fluids. It just doesn't make sense. Furthermore, Billy, if you look at the actual decorum of Morgan Ingram, I just do not believe it was in her character to be so overly distraught to run into her bathroom and hunt for an old prescription from like 2008 or 2009 of amitriptyline. As only a few pills were missing from the expired prescription, I just do not think these missing pills are what took her life. If she were suicidal, or even entertained the idea of committing suicide, not only would she have attempted to consume more pills from the expired prescription, but it is evidently clear there are stronger pills she could have consumed. Billy, the Ingrams didn't have cyclobenzaprine in their house or any of the additional drugs found in Morgan's bloodstream and system in their house. Nothing. And to those of you, and you know who you are, who attempted to devalue this woman and depict her as a mentally ill, suicidal junkie, you clearly have no idea what you are talking about. And to continue to spread your banal propaganda to fit your inaccurate narratives. You also attack people and spread lies about people, including myself, just because you disagree with them or me. Currently, there are no laws protecting anyone who is deceased. And people can pretty much say whatever they want. There's so much speculation. The day before Morgan Ingram was found, she wrote on Facebook, Billy, and I quote, "I love life." She was clearly excited about her new puppy, Wyla, and the holidays approaching. She had so much to look forward to. A suicidal person doesn't say those things. One can also raise concerns when looking at her autopsy photos, as they prove a picture can speak many things words simply cannot. In some of the photos, Billy, it looks like her face was smashed, as if she were assaulted. You also notice marks on her neck, as if she were strangled. The blood on her lip, as well as the way she positioned her hands, just doesn't look right. Billy, I believe this is a case where a young woman was stalked. Her stalking wasn't taken seriously, and now she is dead. Although it is never good to ever accuse someone with little to no proof, I believe Toni Ingram is onto something, especially here. After all, she is the force, the face, and the voice for her daughter. With that said, yes, I believe Morgan Ingram was a victim of foul play, and I believe her case deserves to be reopened and re-examined. I'm Sarah Afshar, and I support Toni Ingram.
Although there is speculation that Morgan Ingram intentionally took her own life with an evidently bogus narrative that she was escaping her mother, I just don't believe this is true and simply a theory created by someone close to the suspect or a rabid true crime fan obsessed with the case. There is also another theory being pushed of a possible overdose. However, the amount of drug in Morgan Ingram's blood alone proves this shouldn't be entertained as factual or even a remote possibility, considering it was the amount in her blood that killed her and not her stomach. Based on what has been shared with me today, I believe it's safe to say that her case deserves a second look.
If you are enjoying tonight's episode of Even Salt Looks Like Sugar, please subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you find fine podcasts. Also visit our official website, evensaltlookslikesugar.com. Thank you for listening. Sinister sugar, the sweetest sea, the diabolical pomegranate, the darkness within.
This is your host, Billy Housh, signing off. Thank you for listening. We will be back next season with more episodes. Remember, not everything in life is what it seems, because even salt looks like sugar.
Listen if you dare.